I watched through my kitchen window as two police officers walked up my driveway, official papers in hand. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. Behind them stood Margaret Chen, the HOA president, her arms crossed with that smug smile I had grown to hate. 3 months ago, I thought I was living the American dream in my perfect suburban home. I followed every rule, paid every fee, kept my lawn pristine. But Margaret had other plans. She wanted my property, and she was willing to destroy my life to get it. The officers knocked on my door with authority that made my hands shake. I knew what those papers meant. The HOA was not just fining me anymore. They were taking everything I had worked for my entire life. But what Margaret did not know was that I had discovered something that would turn her world upside down. That was when I realized the real battle was just beginning. 6 months earlier, I pulled into the driveway of my dream home for the first time as the official owner. The two-story colonial sat on a quiet street in Maple Ridge Estates, surrounded by perfectly manicured lawns and identical mailboxes. I had saved for 15 years to afford this place, working double shifts at the factory and living in a cramped apartment downtown. The neighborhood looked like something from a magazine. Children rode bicycles on sidewalks that sparkled clean. Every house had the same beige and white color scheme, the same approved shrubs, the same regulation fence height. It felt safe, orderly, and exactly what I needed after years of uncertainty. The HOA welcome packet arrived 2 days after I moved in. It was thicker than a phone book, filled with rules about everything from mailbox colors to approved dog breeds. I read every single page twice. Lawn height could not exceed 2.5 inches. Holiday decorations must be removed within 72 hours. No vehicles could be parked on the street overnight. Garden gnomes were strictly prohibited. Most people would have been overwhelmed, but I was determined to be the perfect neighbor. I bought the approved welcome mat, planted the suggested flowers, and set my alarm to mow the lawn every Saturday morning at exactly 9 o'clock. I even bought a ruler to measure my grass height. Margaret Chen introduced herself on my third day. She was a small woman in her 50s with perfectly styled gray hair and clothes that looked like they cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She carried a clipboard and wore a badge that read HOA President in bold letters. "Welcome to Maple Ridge Estates," she said, scanning my front yard with sharp eyes. "I trust you have reviewed all the community guidelines." "Yes, every single one," I replied, eager to make a good impression. "I want to be a model resident." She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "We shall see about that." Over the next few weeks, I noticed Margaret everywhere. She walked the neighborhood every morning with her clipboard, taking notes and photos. She measured fence heights with a tape measure. She counted the number of flowers in each garden bed. Other residents waved nervously when they saw her coming, like children trying to avoid the principal. The first violation notice arrived on a Tuesday. $25 fine for having my trash cans visible from the street for more than 2 hours after pickup. I had been at work and could not move them until evening. I paid the fine immediately and bought a storage shed to hide the cans. The second notice came a week later. $50 fine for having a non-approved doormat. Mine was blue instead of the regulation brown or black. I threw it away and bought a new one that same day. The third notice made my blood run cold. $100 fine for excessive noise during quiet hours. My crime was running my dishwasher at 10:30 at night. I had been catching up on chores after working a 14-hour shift. I called the HOA office to explain, but the receptionist was not interested in my work schedule. "Rules are rules," she said. If you cannot follow them, maybe this neighborhood is not right for you." That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the violation notices. The fines were adding up faster than I could pay them. Worse, I was starting to feel like a prisoner in my own home. Every morning, I checked my front yard like a soldier inspecting for enemy activity. Every evening, I counted my garden plants to make sure none had died overnight. My neighbor across the street, Tom Martinez, knocked on my door that weekend. He was a retired teacher with kind eyes and calloused hands from years of gardening. "I wanted to warn you," he said, glancing around nervously. "Margaret has it out for you. She does this to every new resident, but yours is different. She is pushing harder than usual." "What do you mean?" I asked. Tom looked uncomfortable. "She wants your lot. Your property sits on the prime corner location with the best view of the pond. She has been trying to get the city to rezone it for commercial development for years." My heart sank. I had noticed the location was special, which was why I had paid extra for it, but I never imagined it would make me a target. "What should I do?" I asked. Tom shook his head sadly. "Most people just give up and move. It is easier than fighting her." That night I could not sleep. I walked through my house, looking at all the improvements I had made, all the dreams I had built around this place. Moving was not an option. I had invested everything I had into this home. But I had no idea that Margaret was just getting started. The harassment escalated quickly after my conversation with Tom. Margaret began walking past my house 3 times a day, always with her clipboard and camera. She measured the height of my fence posts, counted the number of flowers in my garden beds, and took photos of my house from every angle. The violation notices started arriving daily. My mailbox was positioned 2 inches too far from the curb. My garden hose was visible from the street. My porch light was too bright. Each fine was larger than the last, and the deadlines for payment grew shorter. I tried to stay ahead of her demands, but it was impossible. The moment I fixed one violation, she would find another. I spent my weekends racing around Home Depot, buying approved materials and making endless modifications to my property. My savings account was bleeding money, and my stress levels were through the roof. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning in October. I was getting ready for work when I heard heavy machinery outside. I looked out my window and saw a city code enforcement truck parked in front of my house. 2 men in hard hats were walking around my yard with measuring devices. I rushed outside still in my pajamas. "Excuse me, what are you doing on my property?" The older man looked up from his clipboard. "We received a complaint about unpermitted structures. We need to inspect your fence, shed, and garden beds." "Unpermitted structures?" I was confused. "I have permits for everything." "Not according to our records," he said. "If we find violations, you will have 30 days to bring everything up to code or face legal action." My hands were shaking as I called in sick to work. I spent the entire day on the phone with the city planning department, trying to track down my permits. The bureaucracy was a nightmare of transferred calls and missing paperwork. By evening, I was exhausted and no closer to resolving the issue. That night, Margaret knocked on my door. She stood on my porch with the same cold smile, but this time she was not alone. A man in an expensive suit stood behind her, carrying a leather briefcase. "Good evening," she said sweetly. "I wanted to introduce you to my attorney, Mr. Davidson. We have a proposition for you." Mr. Davidson stepped forward with papers already prepared. "My client is prepared to make you a generous offer for your property, given the current complications. With the city, it might be wise to consider selling." I stared at the contract in disbelief. The offer was $20,000 below what I had paid for the house and $40,000 below its current market value. "You have got to be kidding me," I said. Margaret's smile widened. "I think you will find that fighting the city can be very expensive. Legal fees, permit costs, potential fines. It adds up quickly. This offer would allow you to walk away clean." "This is my home," I said, my voice rising. "I am not selling it to you at any price." Mr. Davidson exchanged a look with Margaret. "I would encourage you to think carefully. The city takes permit violations very seriously. If you cannot bring your property into compliance, they have the authority to place a lien on your home or even force a sale." My blood ran cold. "Are you threatening me?" "Not at all," Margaret said innocently. "We are simply offering you a solution to your problem. The offer stands for 48 hours. After they left, I sat on my couch staring at the contract. The pieces were falling into place. Margaret had not been randomly targeting me with violations. She had been building a case to force me out of my home. The city inspection was not a coincidence. This was a coordinated attack designed to make my life so miserable that I would sell. I called 3 different lawyers the next day. The first 2 were too busy to take my case. The third one was willing to help, but his retainer fee was $5,000 up front, with no guarantee of success. "HOA disputes are complicated," he explained. "They have teams of lawyers and unlimited resources. Even if you win, it could take years and cost you everything." I hung up the phone feeling defeated. Margaret had chosen her target well. I was a single person with limited resources, fighting against an organization with deep pockets and political connections. That evening, I walked through my neighborhood looking at my neighbors' houses with new eyes. How many of them had been through this same nightmare? How many had given up and moved rather than fight? I thought about Tom's warning and wondered if I was being naive to think I could win. But as I stood in my driveway looking at my home, I felt a surge of determination. This was not just about my property anymore. This was about standing up to a bully who had been terrorizing innocent people for years. I had no idea how I was going to fight back, but I knew I was not going to give up without a war. I spent the next week in a state of controlled panic, but I refused to let Margaret see me sweat. During the day, I went to work and pretended everything was normal. At night, I transformed into a detective, diving deep into the world of HOA law and property rights. My kitchen table became command central. I spread out HOA bylaws, city ordinances, property records, and legal precedents. I made charts and timelines, connecting dots between Margaret's actions and potential legal violations. My laptop battery died twice from staying up until 3 in the morning reading court cases. The first breakthrough came when I discovered that Margaret had been filing complaints against me before I even moved in. The city records showed violation reports dated 2 days before my closing date. She had been planning this attack from the moment she learned I was buying the house. I started reaching out to former residents of Maple Ridge Estates. It took some detective work, but I found contact information for 5 families who had moved away in the past 3 years. Each conversation revealed the same pattern of harassment and forced sales. Sarah Williams had lived 2 streets over until last year. "Margaret made our lives hell," she told me over the phone. "First it was our fence, then our mailbox, then our dog. The fines never stopped coming. We finally sold just to escape." David and Jennifer Ross had faced similar treatment. "She targeted us because we had the corner lot with the best view," Jennifer explained. "The harassment was relentless. We reported it to the police, but they said it was a civil matter. But the most important conversation was with Elena Vasquez, who had worked for the HOA office for 2 years before quitting. Margaret was corrupt, Elena told me during our coffee meeting. She had deals with local contractors and developers. She would force people to sell, then flip the properties to her friends for huge profits. "Do you have any proof?" I asked. Elena looked around nervously. "I kept copies of some documents. I knew what she was doing was wrong, but I needed the job. After I quit, I thought about reporting her, but I was scared of retaliation." She handed me a manila folder filled with photocopied emails and financial records. My hands trembled as I read through them. The documents showed a clear pattern of corruption. Margaret had been using her position to orchestrate property deals that benefited her personal business interests. The smoking gun was an email chain between Margaret and a local developer named Richard Stone. They discussed specific properties in the neighborhood, including mine, and outlined strategies for forcing current owners to sell below market value. "Your lot is the prize," Margaret had written. "Prime corner location with pond access. Once we get the zoning changed, it will be worth triple what they paid." I spent 3 days verifying the information in Alina's documents. Everything checked out. Margaret had been running a real estate scam using her HOA position as cover. She had forced at least 12 families to sell their homes under duress, then profited from the subsequent sales. But having evidence was only half the battle. I needed to figure out how to use it effectively. Traditional legal channels would take years and cost more money than I had. I needed a different approach. That was when I remembered something my grandfather had taught me years ago. He had been a union organizer in the steel mills, and he always said that the best weapon against corrupt authority was exposure. "Shine a light on the cockroaches," he used to say. "They hate being seen." I began researching Margaret's background and discovered she had political ambitions. She was planning to run for city council next year, and her campaign website emphasized her commitment to ethical leadership and community service. I also learned that she owned a property management company that specialized in HOA services. Her business had grown significantly over the past 5 years, coinciding with the increase in forced sales in our neighborhood. The more I dug, the more I realized that Margaret's entire public persona was built on lies. She presented herself as a community advocate, but she was actually a predator who destroyed families for profit. I started documenting everything with the same obsessive attention to detail that Margaret used in her harassment campaign. I created files for each violation she had issued, cross-referencing them with the evidence of her corruption. I built a timeline showing how her attacks on me fit into her larger pattern of abuse. By the end of the week, I had assembled a comprehensive case that would destroy her reputation and potentially land her in prison. But I still needed to figure out the best way to deploy my evidence for maximum impact. That was when I discovered my secret weapon, and everything changed. My secret weapon turned out to be something Margaret never expected: social media and public records laws. While she was busy playing political games behind closed doors, I was learning how to wage war in the digital age. I created a detailed blog documenting every aspect of Margaret's corruption, but I was smart about it. I did not just rant and rave like an angry homeowner. I presented the evidence methodically, like a prosecutor building a case. I included photocopies of documents, email screenshots, and financial records that Elena had provided. The blog was titled "The Maple Ridge Files: How One HOA President Destroys Lives for Profit." I wrote it in simple, clear language that anyone could understand. I explained how Margaret's scam worked, how many families she had victimized, and how much money she had made from her illegal activities. But I did not stop there. I filed Freedom of Information Act requests with the city, demanding all communications between Margaret and city officials. I requested copies of all permits, violations, and complaints filed in our neighborhood over the past 5 years. I wanted to create a public record of her corruption that could not be denied or hidden. The response was immediate and dramatic. Within 24 hours of posting the blog, I received a cease and desist letter from Mr. Davidson, Margaret's attorney. The letter threatened to sue me for defamation and demanded that I remove all content immediately. I had expected this reaction, so I was prepared. I called a media lawyer who specialized in First Amendment cases. After reviewing my evidence, he agreed to represent me pro bono. "This is exactly the kind of case we love," he told me. "Public interest, clear evidence of corruption, and a defendant who is trying to silence the truth. Margaret would be crazy to take this to court." But Margaret was not just crazy. She was desperate. Instead of backing down, she doubled down on her attacks. She filed more violation notices, claiming that my air conditioning unit was too loud and that my flower beds were the wrong shape. She even tried to have my car towed for being parked 6 inches over the property line. Each new attack became content for my blog. I documented every violation notice, every fine, every attempt at harassment. I posted photos and videos showing how ridiculous her complaints were. The story went viral within our community, then spread to neighboring towns. Local news stations picked up the story. The first interview was with Channel 7, and I was nervous but prepared. I stuck to the facts, presented the evidence clearly, and let Margaret's own words condemn her. "This is not about HOA rules," I explained to the reporter. "This is about corruption and abuse of power. Margaret Chen has been destroying families for personal profit, and it needs to stop." The interview aired on the evening news, and the response was overwhelming. My phone rang constantly with calls from other HOA victims sharing their stories. People I had never met stopped me in the grocery store to offer support and encouragement. But the most important call came from Detective Sarah Mitchell with the Financial Crimes Unit. She had seen the news story and was interested in investigating Margaret's activities. "We have been getting complaints about HOA corruption for months," she told me, "but nobody had the evidence to build a case. Your documentation could be exactly what we need." I met with Detective Mitchell the next day and turned over all my evidence. She was impressed by the thoroughness of my research and the quality of the documentation. "This is better than most cases we get from professional investigators," she said. "You have done our job for us." Meanwhile, Margaret was panicking. She stopped her daily walks past my house and started avoiding me entirely. Her attorney sent increasingly desperate letters demanding that I stop my campaign of harassment. The pressure was getting to her. Other residents in the neighborhood started coming forward with their own stories of abuse. The HOA board called an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. I attended that meeting with 23 other residents who had been victimized by Margaret's schemes. We presented a united front, demanding her immediate resignation and a complete audit of HOA finances. Margaret sat at the head of the table, her usual confident demeanor replaced by visible anxiety. For the first time since I had known her, she looked small and vulnerable. "These accusations are completely false," she said, her voice shaking. This is a coordinated attack by a disgruntled homeowner who refuses to follow community rules. But the other board members were not buying it. They had seen the evidence, read the blog posts, and heard from too many victims to dismiss the claims. Board member Janet Phillips spoke first. "Margaret, we need to address these allegations seriously. The evidence is compelling, and the community has lost faith in your leadership." That was when I knew we were winning. The emergency board meeting was just the beginning. Within a week, Margaret's carefully constructed world started crumbling around her. The evidence I had gathered was creating a domino effect that reached far beyond our little neighborhood. The city council launched an investigation into Margaret's relationship with local developers. The state attorney general opened a consumer protection case based on the complaints from displaced families. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit requested copies of all HOA financial records for the past 5 years. But Margaret was not going down without a fight. She hired a crisis management firm and launched a counterattack designed to destroy my credibility. She claimed I was a disgruntled tenant who had been evicted from multiple properties. She said I was mentally unstable and had been stalking her for months. The accusations were completely false, but they were professionally crafted to sound believable. Margaret's crisis team planted stories in local social media groups, suggesting that I was the real problem in the neighborhood. They created fake accounts to post negative comments about me and spread rumors about my background. For a few days, the strategy seemed to be working. Some people started questioning my motives and wondering if maybe Margaret was the victim after all. I received several nasty phone calls and emails from people who believed her lies. But Margaret made a crucial mistake. She underestimated the power of documentation and overestimated the effectiveness of her smear campaign. Every lie she told about me could be disproven with public records. Every false claim she made could be contradicted with evidence. I responded to her attacks not with emotion, but with facts. I posted my employment records showing steady work history at the same company for 8 years. I provided rental agreements proving I had been a model tenant. I shared bank statements showing I had saved money responsibly to buy my home. More importantly, I kept the focus on her crimes rather than her personal attacks against me. Every time she tried to change the subject, I redirected attention back to the evidence of her corruption. The turning point came when Alina Vasquez agreed to go public with her story. Until then, she had been an anonymous source, but the pressure was mounting for her to testify officially. She was scared of retaliation, but she was also angry about what Margaret had done to innocent families. Alina's television interview was devastating for Margaret. She appeared on camera with documents and insider knowledge that no one could question. She explained exactly how Margaret's scheme worked, how much money was involved, and how many people had been victimized. Margaret would target new homeowners with aggressive violation campaigns, Alina explained to the reporter. She would make their lives so miserable that they would sell their homes for below market value. Then she would facilitate the sale to her developer friends, taking a cut of the profits. The interview included audio recordings Alina had made of Margaret discussing her schemes. In one particularly damning recording, Margaret laughed about making a family cry when they were forced to sell their dream home. "These people are so naive," Margaret could be heard saying. "They think buying a house makes them untouchable, but I own this neighborhood and I decide who gets to stay." The reaction was swift and brutal. Margaret's property management company lost 6 major contracts within 24 hours. Her campaign for city council collapsed when major donors withdrew their support. The HOA board called another emergency meeting to discuss her immediate removal. But the most satisfying moment came when Detective Mitchell called to tell me that Margaret had been arrested on charges of fraud, extortion, and corruption. The evidence I had gathered was the foundation of a criminal case that could send her to prison for 10 years. I was at work when I got the call, and I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to process the news. After months of feeling powerless and victimized, I was finally seeing justice. That evening, I drove through the neighborhood and noticed something different. People were outside working in their yards, talking to neighbors, and generally acting like human beings instead of prisoners. The atmosphere of fear that had dominated our community was finally lifting. Tom Martinez knocked on my door that night with a bottle of wine and a huge smile. "I heard about Margaret's arrest," he said. "I wanted to thank you for what you did. You saved this neighborhood." Other neighbors started stopping by to share their own stories and express their gratitude. People I had never met before were introducing themselves and apologizing for not speaking up sooner. "We were all scared," admitted Mrs. Johnson from down the street, "but watching you fight back gave us courage to stand up too." The new HOA board held its first meeting the following week, and the change was remarkable. Instead of intimidation and fear, there was actual discussion and collaboration. Instead of targeting residents with violations, they focused on genuine community improvements. But I knew the real victory was not just about Margaret's downfall. It was about proving that ordinary people can fight back against corruption and win. It was about showing that documentation and persistence can overcome money and political connections. Margaret had picked the wrong target, and now she was paying the price. The criminal trial began 6 months after Margaret's arrest, and it was everything I had hoped for and more. The courtroom was packed with former residents, current neighbors, and local media. This was not just about Margaret anymore. This had become a symbol of the fight against HOA corruption across the country. I was the star witness for the prosecution, and I had prepared for this moment like it was the most important performance of my life. I wore my best suit and brought 3 binders of evidence organized with military precision. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Maria Santos, walked me through the chronology of events step by step. We started with my purchase of the house and Margaret's immediate targeting of my property. We covered every violation notice, every fine, every attempt at harassment. But the most powerful moment came when we presented the evidence of Margaret's broader corruption scheme. The courtroom fell silent as I read from the email exchanges between Margaret and her developer associates. The jury members leaned forward in their seats, clearly shocked by the brazen nature of the conspiracy. "Can you tell the jury what you discovered about Mrs. Chen's business relationships?" Ada Santos asked. I looked directly at Margaret, who was sitting at the defense table trying to look innocent. I discovered that she was using her position as HOA president to force homeowners to sell their properties below market value. She would then facilitate the sale to her business associates, taking a percentage of the profits. Margaret's attorney, Mr. Davidson, tried to object, but the judge overruled him. The evidence was too strong and too well documented to challenge. "How many families do you believe were victimized by this scheme?" Ada Santos continued. "Based on my research, at least 15 families over the past 5 years. The total financial impact was over $2 million in lost equity and forced sales." The defense's strategy was predictable. They tried to paint me as an obsessed neighbor who had blown minor HOA disputes out of proportion. They claimed that Margaret was simply doing her job as HOA president, and that I was the one who had escalated the situation. But their case fell apart when Alina Vasquez took the stand. She provided insider testimony that corroborated every aspect of my accusations. She had worked for Margaret directly and had witnessed the corruption firsthand. Mrs. Chen would openly discuss her plans to force out certain homeowners, Alina testified. She would say things like, "I need that corner lot for the development deal," or "This family needs to go so we can flip their house." The defense attorney tried to attack Alina's credibility, suggesting she was a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. But Alina remained calm and professional, sticking to the facts and supporting her testimony with documentation. The most dramatic moment came when Detective Mitchell presented the financial evidence. She had traced money flows between Margaret's personal accounts, her property management company, and the developers she worked with. The pattern was clear and undeniable. The defendant received over $400,000 in payments that can be directly traced to forced property sales in Maple Ridge Estates, Detective Mitchell explained. These payments were disguised as consulting fees, but they corresponded exactly with the timeline of harassment campaigns against targeted homeowners. Margaret's face grew pale as the detective presented bank records and financial statements. This was not about interpretation or opinion anymore. This was about cold, hard numbers that proved her guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. The defense tried one last desperate strategy. They put Margaret on the stand to testify on her own behalf. It was a catastrophic mistake. Under cross-examination, Margaret's carefully constructed persona crumbled completely. She became defensive, angry, and ultimately revealed the arrogance and contempt that had driven her actions. "These people bought houses in my neighborhood," she said, her voice rising. "They needed to understand that there are standards and expectations. If they could not meet those standards, they did not belong there." Ada Santos pressed harder. "So you felt justified in targeting families with young children, elderly residents, and working-class homeowners?" "I was protecting property values," Margaret snapped. "Some people do not understand what it takes to maintain a quality community." The jury's reaction was visible. Several members shook their heads in disgust. One woman in the front row actually gasped at Margaret's callousness. "Did you profit financially from forcing these families to sell their homes?" Ada Santos asked. Margaret's attorney objected, but the damage was done. Margaret had revealed herself as exactly the kind of person the evidence suggested she was, a bully who used her position to prey on vulnerable people. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood up with a serious expression. "On the charge of fraud in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of extortion, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of corruption of a public official, we find the defendant guilty." I sat in the courtroom listening to the verdict with tears in my eyes. It was not just about winning anymore. It was about justice for every family Margaret had destroyed, every dream she had crushed, every life she had disrupted for her own profit. Margaret collapsed in her chair as the judge scheduled sentencing for the following month. Her reign of terror was officially over. Margaret Chen was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $2.3 million in restitution to her victims. The judge called her crimes a betrayal of public trust that caused immeasurable harm to innocent families. But the real victory was not just Margaret's punishment. It was the complete transformation of our neighborhood and the precedent we set for communities across the country. The new HOA board implemented sweeping reforms that eliminated the potential for future abuse. They established an independent oversight committee, created transparent financial reporting, and implemented due process protections for residents facing violations. The days of arbitrary fines and harassment campaigns were over. My own situation was resolved completely. All the violation notices Margaret had issued were declared invalid. The city dropped all permit challenges and officially recognized that my property was in full compliance with all regulations. I even received a formal apology from the mayor. But the impact extended far beyond Maple Ridge Estates. The case became a rallying cry for HOA reform across the state. Legislators introduced new laws requiring transparency in HOA operations and creating criminal penalties for board members who abuse their positions. I was invited to speak at conferences and town halls about HOA corruption. I testified before the state legislature about the need for stronger consumer protections. I helped draft model legislation that has since been adopted in 12 states. The most satisfying aspect was hearing from other victims who found the courage to fight back because of my example. I received hundreds of emails from people who had been targeted by corrupt HOA boards and were now taking action to protect themselves. A woman in Phoenix wrote to tell me that she had used my blog as a template to document her own HOA's financial irregularities. She discovered that her board president had been embezzling community funds for 5 years. Her case led to criminal charges and the recovery of over $800,000. A man in Denver sent me copies of documents showing that his HOA was taking kickbacks from contractors in exchange for awarding maintenance contracts. He followed my strategy of methodical documentation and media exposure, ultimately forcing the entire board to resign. These stories reminded me that my fight was never just about my property or my neighborhood. It was about standing up to bullies and proving that ordinary people can hold corrupt officials accountable. Alina Vasquez started a consulting business helping homeowners navigate HOA disputes. She uses her insider knowledge to level the playing field for residents facing harassment campaigns. She credits our case with giving her the courage to turn her painful experience into a force for good. Tom Martinez was elected to the new HOA board and has become a champion for resident rights. He implemented regular community meetings where homeowners can voice concerns and propose improvements. The atmosphere in our neighborhood is now collaborative rather than adversarial. As for me, I still live in the same house that Margaret tried to steal from me. My corner lot with the pond view is more beautiful than ever, and I enjoy every sunrise knowing that I earned the right to be here. I keep a framed copy of the newspaper headline from Margaret's conviction on my office wall. HOA president convicted of fraud, corruption. It serves as a reminder that justice is possible when people refuse to give up. The experience taught me that the most powerful weapon against corruption is not money or political connections. It is documentation, persistence, and the courage to stand up for what is right. Margaret thought she was untouchable because she had authority and resources, but she underestimated the power of one person who refused to be intimidated. My advice to anyone facing similar circumstances is simple. Document everything, build your case methodically, and never let them see you give up. Bullies count on their victims being too scared or too tired to fight back. But when you stand up to them with evidence and determination, they crumble faster than you would expect. Margaret Chin learned that lesson the hard way. And now our neighborhood, and countless others across the country, are safer because one person decided to fight back. The American dream is not just about owning a home. It is about having the freedom to live peacefully in that home without fear of harassment or corruption. That is a dream worth fighting for, and it is a fight that we can win.